So here we are. Charles Moskowitz, welcome aboard. Michael D. Shaw. He's a chemist. He's a medical writer. He's written over 1,000 columns over the years, dealing with politics and its intersection with health. So, Mike, I guess that first of all, as I talked about, I did get the vaccine.
Okay, well, did you have any reaction?
Not really. I mean, I got the vaccine last Friday. It was the Pfizer.
All right.
And I didn't really have much. I mean, maybe later that night, I felt slightly feverish, maybe for an hour or so, and
Oh,
took my temperature. I didn't have a temperature. And then it went away, and there's been nothing since. So I don't think
right.
I did. I mean, I'm lucky. I mean, I feel like I bit the bullet.
So you're already set up for the second one?
Yes, and
Okay.
I understand that that one is the more questionable, bigger one in terms of possible side effects.
That's what they say.
They say that, although I think with the Pfizer less so than the other ones, the Moderna anyway. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, so far so good. I'm not
Good.
here to either condone or condemn. I don't endorse, and I don't say don't. I mean, I'm not in a position to do that. But for me, it seems to be working out okay.
Well, that's good to know.
And I don't know about as we've talked about, it is still technically an experimental drug. It's not something that's been approved by the FDA.
That's correct.
They do say that there's pretty good evidence that at least the Pfizer does lead to development of immunity. So if that be the case, good. I mean, I'll be able to finally go out and go back and have a beer at a bar.
That's right. So when do you get your vaccine passport?
Well, I mean, I already have a provisional one
Oh,
that I'm supposed to carry around in my wallet. And
oh,
yeah, that's an issue. And I guess that once you do it, you get a more formal one. And of course, you're getting to a controversy, which is that people, are being told. I mean, I think that this is something that, it may end up becoming literally a passport to get into an airplane or to go to a concert or to go to any public venue. And when this was first mentioned by people like Alex Jones and every others, that, oh, that's a crazy nutcase conspiracy, right wing conspiracy theory. But it turns out that they were absolutely right, because now it is being discussed in the mainstream, and it is actually more than being discussed, I believe, in the state of New York, where there are steps going forward to do this.
well, I mean, what's troubling about it is that if it were at least an approved drug, it'd be one thing. But the fact that they've jumped on this with such alacrity for an experimental treatment really shows you how far gone this thing is.
Well, look, there already are, like, informal rules in place. Like, for example, they want to make sure that your child is vaccinated before going to school. It's not like they say that you have to do it by law, and there are people who don't do it because they homeschool. But
Right.
you kind of have to do that. But I think that that's one thing. I mean, it's another thing to actually tell someone they can't go to see a rock concert unless they're vaccinated.
Yeah.
Well, you can't go into a restaurant. I mean,
Well, I mean, what's of course silly about this is that there's no proof that by you taking the vaccine, you will stop shedding virus and be contagious. They never tested that.
so in other
So,
words, if you have, even once one is completely vaccinated and they've passed through the period of whatever, they can still carry the vaccine and still be contagious.
well, yeah. I mean, the excuse that was given was that they didn't have sufficient time to prove that out, um, which is a little odd if you think about it. But so it seems rather absurd that you don't even know that this vaccine prevents you from infecting others, and yet now it's somehow going to be required. And by the way, it doesn't prevent you getting infected either.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, but it does. I mean, and they have a. At least this is what they're saying, and they give you a whole pamphlet they give you a whole booklet of information when you go in to get the vaccine, which of course I read carefully. And they do say that it results in really ensuring that you're not going to get very sick if you do.
Right. I mean, the claim that is made is that if you do get the virus, you should get a more mild infection because you have this enhanced immunity.
Right. That is the claim. That's the very basic of the whole thing.
But here again, I mean, since there's no claim that you aren't infectious, or any claim that you won't get the virus, albeit it might be more mild, enforcing of this passport thing is ridiculous. But
well, the other claim is that even if you do have it, and most people, probably 99 or whatever, 98% of people who do get it, it's asymptomatic.
Right.
That it only becomes spreadable or contagious when it enters into the early stages of being symptomatic, or when you are symptomatic.
Well, they changed their story on that 3 times.
Oh, did they?
That's the latest version. There supposedly were, you can't, if you're asymptomatic, you can still be a carrier. Then it was no, and then it came back to, well, maybe. So we'll see how this thing plays out.
I mean, there's a lot of shifting stories on the whole damn thing.
Yeah, I mean, according to certain people who have been against this whole program, it's a violation of federal law.
You can mention it. We're not on YouTube.
Yeah.
I won't run the program, frankly, on YouTube because
well,
they're censoring.
Bearing in mind that it's not FDA approved, it's a violation of the Nuremberg laws to force someone to take an unproven treatment. So when push comes to shove, they're never going to be able to enforce a vaccine passport. I think they're holding it over people's heads to get them to all get vaccinated. It's also fairly unconscionable that now they're going into essentially a zero risk group, kids. And
you see, that's really, I mean, that's troubling. And as far as like enforcing, I don't think they can enforce anyone even to take something that is approved. I mean, can you force someone by law to take any kind of medication at all? I mean, is that something that's
I don't think it's ever been done. But the idea was that if it were going to be done, it had to be an approved safe medication.
Gotcha.
And this came out of the Nuremberg trials, of course.
Oh yeah, no, that's right.
But that law has been applied to some very unfortunate clinical trials, notoriously involved with psychotropic meds, where they would just pull people off the street, homeless individuals, tell them they're going to pay them some amount of money and pump them up with these drugs, which was a big abuse that was occurring 15, 20 years ago. So,
right. That goes back to the 60s with the, Dr. Jolyon West and some of the other people who were involved with the CIA and were like putting out, LSD and stuff like that. But also, I mean, it's very troubling that they would be trying to experiment on this with children. It's like, first of all, children, unless they have a very serious pre-existing condition, have fairly strong immunity when it comes to this virus. I mean, it's a mild thing, and I think it's really unconscionable that they would try to do this, and also the fact is that, I didn't have a reaction, maybe because I am older and because I've been through a few things and I have immunities and I have certain amounts of resilience, whereas a younger person doesn't in many ways. And, to me, it's almost a catastrophe waiting to happen to give it to children.
Well, they feel they have their opening, and here you go. at least in Fairfax County, I don't know what it's like anywhere else, but you, of course, can't spec the vaccine you want.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine most people would elect to use a one-shot variety rather
Well,
than
no, you
two.
can't either with me. I mean, I
Yeah,
just showed up and that's what they were doing, and that was
yeah,
that. So, I mean, I don't think anybody can do that. You just get what they give you.
yeah.
Um, so at the same time, according to news, according to Lester Holt, and as we've said, I
That's
watch
right.
it, so you don't have to. I mean, the vaccine is increasing. There's a new spike, and it's increasing in, I think they say 21 states, including Massachusetts.
No, what you mean the virus?
The virus. Thank you.
Well, right, but I mean, be wary of that whole discussion, which I guess there's just no way of getting people to think about it in this manner. The entire testing mechanism is a fraud, right? And scores of people have raised that point, but it kind of doesn't matter. But by the same token, if you there's a chance that as people get vaccinated, they're going to test positive more, simply because of the fragments that may occur based on the immune reaction. So this testing was always stupid from the beginning. I have no idea why this was instituted, but there are people that humongously profited off this.
Hmm.
So it got to be this big fad. How many tests are you going to run?
Sure, that was the nightly news. That was
Yeah.
Lester Holt. Now, I think that the CDC though has now come a little bit more clean about it, and they've ramped down some of the numbers because, as we've talked about, and then even the New York Times talked about it, that they had artificially magnified the numbers by means of changing the standards of the test, and that also hospitals who had a financial incentive to report that somebody had passed away from
Right.
COVID-19 when it may have been a minor aspect, and even then not at all. So because once they factored that in, the numbers actually were reduced.
Yeah, well, it was a big scare tactic. I mean, the whole way this thing is handled, as I've said for weeks,
Highly political.
it's just been an outrage. It's been political. The primary purpose of it was to unseat Donald Trump. I mean,
I
no
agree.
one's even denying that now.
No, that's obvious. And yet
But
they're continuing on with it. So I mean, what are
yeah,
they trying to unseat now? I mean, you'd think that.
well, but
I thought maybe one of the benefits of the coup would be that the thing would finally be over the next day.
well, yeah, but they tasted power.
That's that's right.
So now that you can close things down, I mean, why stop?
Yeah, well, that's right. They're not going to seed it, and it's going to go on forever. And I think we had Fauci saying that we can expect it to be well into next year. Speaking of which, I mean, what a phony. To talk about somebody who's become completely drunk with power and with vanity. I mean, talking about an egomaniac.
Oh yeah,
He actually goes on, I think, 60 Minutes, and he's taking full credit for the vaccine and saying that he did it. It was his thing, using the word me. I did this back in January. When, the fact is, and I think President Trump has responded, as have others, that he had nothing to do with it. In fact, if they had listened to him, we would probably have nothing right now. We'd all be still locked away in the basement. There'd be no vaccine at all.
no, I really don't know what the secret of his longevity is. He's completely incompetent. He's never done anything right that I've been able to find in looking at his career. But he amassed a great deal of power because he controls a lot of grant money.
He speaks the voice of the establishment view. And as Steve Deace has a good book out now that's apparently shot up to #1 on the New York Times list,
Wow.
the Faustian bargain. It's all about, or not, I mean, Faucian bargain, I should.
Yeah.
And I haven't read it yet. I asked him if he'd come on with me. We'll see. But, I think that it is starting to unravel, and that ridiculous interview that he did, I think it's for 60 Minutes. And then you had Birx. She apparently had been, you know, very scandalously removed from the position that she
Oh
held
yeah.
under a cloud of disgrace because she comes out with this great statement in a press conference. Don't go to your families at Thanksgiving. Stay home. You can't go. And then she gets on a plane, goes to see her family, and some member of her family drops a dime. And
Well, think about that, Charles. Okay, she was ratted out by her own family,
yes.
which probably means that they don't like her too much.
Oh, and did you see? I mean, I heard a little of this. Oh my, how she came across. It's all Trump's fault now. And then
Yes.
he spoke to me directly. And of course, this is on CNN. Did you feel threatened? Well, I don't want to use the word threatened, but it was very uncomfortable that he was questioning
I
and,
think she was uncomfortable because those scarves were too tight.
I mean, she comes across as this classic left-wing harpy. I'm sorry, but it's as if like, oh, how could he? And it's like she's been somehow affronted because somebody, and plus she's complaining that he spoke too bluntly. I mean, don't we want to have a president who speaks bluntly? We want to have, instead they're used to this kind of language of indirection. Everything has to be in euphemisms. Everything has
Well,
to
to
be
your loyal viewers, uh, Fauci and Birx are an exact picture of academic medicine and public health.
right.
It's just an outrage. Uh, I've unfortunately met a lot of people who are involved in policymaking and who are on big committees in fancy uh, public health schools like your one in Boston,
Right.
Harvard, Chan, and so on. And I'm sorry, their ignorance is breathtaking. But they have these positions of power, and there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Trump made enemies by uh, actually showing what was behind the curtain, so to speak.
that's why he's now been not only, I mean, which brings me to another subject, and that
Sure.
is that the predictably the banning of oppositional commentary is really hitting high now. It's really going on octane, and I expected it. I think it's probably only a matter of time before I'm completely banned. I don't know when, but now Doug TenNapel, I don't know if you follow him. He's been banned from YouTube permanently.
Now, what was his thing? I'm not
His
familiar.
thing was talking about the election, period. That's all he did. He talked about the election and he reported on various improprieties as they developed. There are investigations in Arizona. There's one going on in New Hampshire. Apparently, there's one that's now opened up in Missouri, where he is following the story of uh, situations by which there are being recounts are being called for and are being done, as in the case of Arizona. And for that, he's been banned. He questions the legitimacy. You can't talk about the last election. Mark Dice has now been banned from Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yes, and he mentioned, and he's huge. He's one of
Oh,
the
yeah. There's about 1.7 million on YouTube, I think.
yeah. So I mean, if they're going after him, I mean, and also he mentioned when he mentioned this. Actually, he put up his YouTube today saying that he's been banned on Facebook. That apparently President Trump is developing a site. I think it's called The Office or something.
I tabbed the URL. Just
What is it?
you can Google President Trump website. It's like 45 something.com.
Oh yeah, Office 45.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet, but his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is also launching a kind of an online news video program, and she interviewed him, and it was one of her first interviews.
Hmm.
And that has been taken down and banned on Facebook because Facebook not only banned Donald Trump as president of the United States, but apparently no one else can even interview him. It'll be taken down. He cannot have any, because he's been banned. Apparently, they continue to ban anybody who has a person that's been banned on Facebook. So, the establishment censorship is really getting very strenuous.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
the fact that they could even ban a sitting president of the United States is something that we can't even begin to express how outrageous that is in a free country. But now he can't even, his own daughter-in-law, she can't even bring him in to talk, to talk about politics.
Well, he's going to develop his own video platform,
Yes.
and I think that was the purpose of that website, actually. But no, but I mean, what's really disturbing is not so much. Well, the censorship is bad enough, but the fact that your average liberal is cool with that.
Oh, they think it's hysterical. They think it's hilarious. They love it.
And to put that in perspective.
Although, to give credit where it's due, Bernie Sanders has come out and condemned it, so that's at least good. But they, it's justified. I mean, we have to silence and stamp out anyone who doesn't goose step to our views. And it's the fact that this is happening in this country is really, really bad. And it's what's developing. It's depressing, and it's what's happening. It's just you're not going to have anything going on other than what the I hate to use the word, but the Nazi establishment will permit. Everything else gets burned. And that.
Well, here's the good news, though, that with this going on, and the fact that media coverage of Joe Biden is a joke, nobody's watching the news. The ratings are down 30-40%. And it would not break my heart if some of those outfits, went belly up.
I don't think they seem to care. I mean, Tucker Carlson apparently is. It looks like he's going to be taken off of Fox News, because even though his ratings are high and through the roof, the advertisers are boycotting because they're being pressured. And so if you watch Tucker Carlson now, and this is something that Mark Dice mentioned also, you see that he's on longer because they don't have as many commercials. And now he's setting it up. He's starting to do an online show 3 times a week, which is probably the same thing he's doing on Fox. Yeah. But it looks like Mark Dice thinks that he's beginning to set things up because he's leaving Fox. He's not going to be allowed on television anymore. And he's going to have to transition to these alternative vehicles. And this is a major figure. I mean, this isn't, some fly-by-night show either. I mean, he's...
what's happened is the definitions have changed, right? People ask me why these big corporations have become all left-wing and woke. Well, the easy answer to it is that Henry Ford Sr. isn't the president of Ford's anymore, okay?
No, his Marxist followers run it now.
Yeah. So what happens is the people that get to great heights in corporate America are basically, people that got MBAs at some prestigious university, matriculated their way into these jobs, are left-wing by virtue of their background, have no idea in the world what it takes to build up a business. And so the definitions have kind of changed, but people haven't noticed. So to be a corporate titan is not the same thing as it was 50, 100 years ago to be a corporate titan, because as I think I said last week, E.I. DuPont de Nemours in the early 19th century is not the guy running DuPont Chemical at the moment, so that's all changed. And it's unfortunate. It's a product of the educational system, conformity, and any other thing that you want to bring into it. But there's going to have to be enough rebels, or basically it's lights out. You can see it happening. You can't talk about anything.
Right.
They're raising transgender, critical race theory in schools. Most parents are afraid to speak up, but some of them are pulling their kids.
I mean, not to take a quick chance to get in a little tiny shameless plug here to the extent that anyone would know, but my most recent pamphlet, and I'm trying to write one a month, and they range around 10,000 words. It's a little bigger than a pamphlet.
So these pamphlets are tracts.
They're diatribes, actually. Yeah. But my most recent one is called How to Win an Election.
Yeah.
And it's a handbook for the citizen candidate. And I'm drawing from my own experience as a congressional candidate and also an awareness. And by the way, it's available now. It's on Amazon Books. They haven't taken it off. You can get it. It's less than $3, and I think that it's free right now because when they first publish a book, it's always free at first. So come on down. And but I was motivated by what happened in the last election in that I realized that the reason it happened is because state legislators did not understand the actual powers that they have in the Constitution. And so they allowed governors and secretaries of state and judges to run roughshod and make election laws that help Biden, and that they didn't, if they had understood the powers of their offices, it wouldn't have happened. But they hadn't used those powers, and they probably hadn't used them for decades. And that if you look into a brief background of it, constitutional powers have been transferred from elected officials to either federal government or these quasi-sovereign agencies,
Right.
a lot of which was set up by FDR, and by non-government agencies and even international agencies and private agencies like foundations that are now operating using government powers. They're making laws, and it's not constitutional. And if we can begin to take back our local government, and when I say local, I'm talking city council, aldermen, board of assessors, city, school committees, zoning boards. I mean, there are a lot of these elected positions,
right,
by regular people, citizens, your housewife, a house husband, a teenager, a retired person, empty nester. You can run for these offices, and I show people how to win, and it can be done, and that you can begin to use those offices and reassert their sovereign right to be functioning.
But how does a person get motivated in the first place?
Well, the way they get motivated.
How about you? You're just the guy that would have to run against Barney Frank.
Right.
You knew it would be tough, but somehow, you were so pissed off, or what?
Well, there's a couple of issues that really you care about, and that's all you need. One or two issues you're passionate about, and you just want to get those issues out there in the public domain where people can hear about them, they can debate them, and you can make a change. And, even though you can win, even if you don't win, if you run properly, you will be heard. The media will cover you, and you will get to talk about those issues. It will enter into the public consciousness, and you can make a difference. And that's all. I mean, that's what you need to do. It gives us, it's a great and exhilarating sense of purpose to do something like this. You can really affect your community and your future. Now, when I started to talk about it recently, I got a contact from someone, and they told me something I already knew, something that's obvious. And that is that if you run for local school board, you'll find out that you have very little actual power over the curriculum or what goes on in the school, because it's all been transferred to the federal government under the Department of Education, and to these private entities, even, like the Pearson Publishing House, which publishes Common Core curriculum. Or you mentioned this race theory thing. I mean, it's all tied into that, and that school boards surrendered those powers going way back. I mean, this isn't new. It didn't happen yesterday. We're talking back probably to the 1930s. They began to turn these powers over to these unelected, unaccountable agencies and bureaucrats and the federal government in exchange for money or whatever. They give a little grant. People, it's very subtle. And so if you're elected to a school board, you're going to find out that you don't have much power to do anything other than cosmetic things like set up a clam bake. I mean, right? You're not going to really affect. And my contention is that we have to have citizens run for those offices, get those offices, and begin to reassert that power.
Yeah.
It's there. We need to have an awakening that this is a power that we have because it exists. It just needs to be exercised. Otherwise, it's going to disappear. And we saw this already in this last election, whether you agree with me or not about it. And by the way, my book is fine for somebody who's a Bernie Sanders person. You could be on the left. If that's what your community reflects, you should get involved and run and try to represent those views, because the local government is the most powerful government in reality. Even though they've lost their consciousness of that power, it's still there. And because, I mean, obviously a school board person, there's somebody whose sons and daughters are in the school.
Right.
They know what's going on in the school. They live in your neighborhood. They have to talk to their neighbors. That is the most accountable government, not some bureaucrat who's never been elected or who's in Washington. So this is a manual for people to begin to look at and think about running for local office. And I'm also making myself available as a consultant for a small, so I'll charge maybe $50. If you want to set up an appointment with me, I will give you a 90-minute Zoom meeting where I will go over with you, left, right, or center, I don't care, as long as you're a citizen running. I don't want to have hacks. I'm not here to help, because that's most of our politicians. They're just in there because they want to, they're climbing the ladder and they want to get to a bigger position, or they're connected, or they're in it for the money, or they're in it because they're egomaniacs. They don't have any conviction. That includes even most, people who you think are conservative.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, that how do you overcome the fact that most activists are left wing? Because by nature, most conservatives are actually trying to make a living. And...
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, look, my efforts are for conservatives and people like Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who I'm hoping to reach. And I hope others do too, because,
the natural type of activist is some wild-eyed commie type who brings in these critical race theories and whatnot.
Well, look, again, I mean, I'm suggesting that somebody who's might hear this, who's, as I said, they could be a housewife, they could be whomever.
Right.
You don't have to be, like a strong activist. You just have to have a little extra time to run for one of these offices, and you might be shocked to find out that you can win. And I get into why and how. It's something that is very doable. And
look at Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah,
she ran against 5-6 time incumbent.
A great example. She took on one of the big lights of the Democratic Party, and she did it with very little money. And she went, whether we like her or not, I mean, this is beside the point. She went to the meetings. She knocked on doors. She, talked to people. She spent time doing the necessary footwork. I use the classic example of Tip O'Neill. Now, Tip O'Neill, when he ran for Congress, he was, or I think it's also when he ran for local state rep, he was not the establishment. The Kennedys did not like him. He was not part of the Massachusetts in crowd. And he went door to door in his district and met, and this is a man who, by the way, heavy drinker, obese, not in good health, but he still went out every night and he knocked on the doors in every neighborhood in the district.
What was his district?
Cambridge, which, by the way, back then it was a different Cambridge. We're not talking, it's not, like now it's like Pyongyang. They just approved, they're giving health benefits to thruples. I don't know if you heard about that. You can have a threesome and all three of you get health. Anyway, but we're talking about, Cambridge in the 1940s and 50s when he first ran.
The working class.
Yeah, it was a blue collar Democrat, lunch bucket, labor-based, place back then. Putting aside Harvard, that's always been weird, but I'm just saying in general. And, he made contact with people. He went and met thousands of people. I did this when I ran. I personally went out and got the signatures to get on the ballot, which means you have to collect 2,000 signatures now. I mean, I think back then it wasn't as many. And in reality, it means you have to really get 3,000 signatures because the clerks go over those lists and they'll cross off anyone who's not absolutely proper. I mean, back then they have those kinds of standards. And it's an incredible experience. It is a transformative experience to do it. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean, without question, because as somebody who approached politics and really had only been with a lot of reading and a lot of kind of theoretical stuff and a lot of kind of egghead stuff, and who did some radio, but only like interviewed fancy pants intellectuals. I didn't really know what real people were thinking. And when you go out there and you go door to door and you stand in a subway stop and gather signatures in front of a supermarket, or if you go to events like I did, I went to the Boston Marathon, which ran through my district, and walked gathered, you really make contact with thousands of people, and they have opinions and they tell you their opinions. And in some cases they don't like you, which is fine. But you learn things that you could never otherwise learn, and it changes you. I think in my case, it brought me maybe a little bit more to the center, maybe a little bit more pragmatic than I had been, because you hear real stories about real people dealing with real things. And in fact, I believe that when Donald Trump was running, and you might recall the scandal about the tape, with Billy Bush. I forget what that was.
Oh yeah.
He made some lewd comments about women, and he didn't realize it was a private conversation. He didn't know somebody was running a tape recorder, and they obviously saved it, and they didn't release it years later. It's one of those things. It's like when George W. Bush, 2 days before the election, they released the fact that he had been arrested for
drug trafficking 200 years earlier.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of these things that was in somebody's file cabinet waiting for the right moment. That's how politics works, right? And I get into that, by the way, in my book, how to deal with that. But his response to it was, I thought, interesting, in that he not only did he apologize and say that he had been embarrassed by it, but he also said that he'd changed, and that he was a different person than he was back when that recording was made, and that what did change him was the thousands of people that he met while running for president. And I believed him when he said that, because I had been through that. You go out and you meet people that he never would have otherwise met, people that are outside of his usual circles, outside of his comfort zone, not part of his country club. And you're going out to all the neighborhoods and you're actually sitting down and meeting real people. And you do this over time. It does change you. And it's a very powerful experience. It's to me, in and of itself, it's a reason to run for office. It is an incredible thing. So, I urge people to consider doing it. If you're running for a very small local office, you won't have to do that much. You don't need 2,000 signatures. Maybe you could, depending upon your jurisdiction, you may only need like a couple of hundred signatures. But it's just an incredible experience. And I'm hoping that people will take me up on it. I hope that they get the pamphlet. It's only $3, and that they contact me, and I will do a consultation with them. And we can talk about their issues, how they can frame them, how they can deal with media, how they can raise money. I mean, I'll get into the nuts and bolts, and I will help them set up a blueprint for how to run for their office. And so that's what I'm up to.
No, that's very good.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, people, even when they were going through all these voting irregularity stuff, they were concentrating on, scandalous things like this signature isn't this person and so on, but losing the forest for the trees, because they didn't make until the very end a big deal about the fact that these laws were changed improperly. That was the real fraud.
Oh yeah. And also, a lot of the things I'm talking about now, the standards of like getting signatures with every single stroke of the pen has to be exact, and they put the signature under a microscope. That's fine, by the way. And that is that all went out the window this last election anyways. We know that.
Yeah.
I mean, the Secretary of State from Michigan actually set up a law without congressional approval, saying that the signature matching for absentee ballots would not be necessary, that it would be if the signature had a vague, remote semblance to the signature they had on file. They would have to let that go through. Now, who was it that was deciding that, beside the question of who gets to decide, who looks at those signatures, who is the clerk involved? Is it done in the open? Is it done with more than one person? We don't know any of that. But the fact that they would throw that out and do it without congressional approval, that's why I want to see people run for state rep and state senator. The state house in your state is an underutilized political entity. They don't realize they can take a look, they can go into education, healthcare, welfare, zoning, all kinds of social policies, and they can make laws and get rid of bad laws. They can do that, but they don't know they can do it. They don't know their own powers.
Evidently. I mean,
No,
you wonder why.
Because those powers have been surrendered over a century. It goes, look, I mean, historically, I trace it really back to the Wilson administration, but that's another subject. I mean, there is a history of this. It's not new. This didn't just happen yesterday. I mean, this is a gradual encroachment by not just the federal government, but as I say, private entities into the legitimate constitutional right of the citizen to self-govern, especially
these NGOs gained power because they were the quote experts.
Exactly, so-called, and that those powers, they would work their way into these local governments, usually offering some carrots. They would give some benefits, and in exchange, there'd be strings attached. The local government would surrender portions of their responsibility.
That's right.
And that they can start to take them back. That's my point. If we
How much do you know about how Howard Zinn's book got to be in every school district?
It's one of the most poisonous books. It's corrupted the minds and the souls of millions of Americans.
But how did that suddenly just become?
They've worked the Howard Zinn types have worked their way up the rat line. They have gradually infiltrated within, I know that's an old-fashioned word, but there it is, into powers. They've run for school board while everyone else is asleep. And then once they're in there, they then make these deals with federal agents that are of like mind. As the old communist saying goes, birds of a feather flock together, right? We're going back to the McCarthy era here.
Yeah.
Infiltration. Yes, you're damn right. Subversion. Yeah. That's exactly how they did it. And they didn't do it, they did it in a Fabian style, very gradually over many, many decades. And I'm not suggesting it can be undone overnight either. But if you have a conscious person who gets into these offices, they can at least open the school door. They can shine a light. They could say, this is the curriculum, and bring up public consciousness about it. Maybe they can't change it overnight, but they can begin to reassert these powers that have been laying somnambulant for so many decades, and start to move the ball toward a reassertion of self-government. And that's what we're talking about here. Self-government. Again, if you come from a left-wing community, fine, implement these things. But if that's the will of that community, great. The point is that we have to take back our local government because that's where the power is. And that's what most directly affects our lives.
Well, that was certainly brought out with the way the elections were messed with.
Oh, that's what made me really get busy with this. And I think that, again, and I say this in the book, whether you like or hate Trump is beside the point. His candidacy, his presidency did unleash this awareness, and it can be used for all sides.
Yeah.
We can't.
I think that's very worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because here's I won't mention the name of the organizations, it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of conservative organizations out there that capitalize on the fact that many Americans are ticked off by what's going on. So join fill in the blank, and we will send you every month a report of this and that outrage. Yeah. All right, that's great. So my wife did that with one of these things, and she ended up getting on every single mailing list you can imagine, and some that you couldn't imagine. Because every one of those organizations is going to tell you all these outrages and
Well, that's
spend
probably
$100 and
was there a little donation involved?
yeah, well, of course the latest trick, which I'm sure you've seen,
Yeah.
is you get this big envelope with a survey. Tell us how you feel
Oh,
about
yeah, and
blah,
at the
blah,
end
blah.
of it,
And
they
then at the
want.
very end, yeah, send us your contribution.
And once you do, you're going to end up as happening.
You're on every list forever.
You know, they're going to come after you. It's going to be like you're going to open up a Pandora's box.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're mostly phony. It's just the turf group that's grabbing money. Be careful and don't give money to to Republicans either. You know, especially the ones who sabotage Trump.
Absolutely.
You know, do not give them a dime.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in my case, when I gave some money to the Trump campaign, now I'm on the list of every single Republican office holder in the U.S., it seems.
I think that Trump actually filed a lawsuit to stop that because
I hope so.
He didn't want his name used and his organization by these sort of mugwump Republicans, these
I've heard that term for a while.
that one comes from the 19th century, I think.
Yeah.
I
wasn't covering politics then, but
yeah, the mugwumps, I think they were in the 1880s and they were Republican,
yeah.
But they were like working both sides.
Yeah.
So yeah, be careful with all of that stuff. So anyways, Mike, what else is new?
Well, you talk about Republicans. Kristi Noem kind of blew it, I think, with her. Yeah. I was asked about all these groups. They said, well, why did she do it? Well, it ends up being what we call hubris, right? She's starting to get noticed by the national media. So now she has to be a little more reasoned. She can't be this butt-kicking South Dakota cowgirl anymore. She has to now be a little more reasoned. And her reason was that, well, if we take on the NCAA, the athletes at University of South Dakota and South Dakota State aren't going to be able to compete. And who cares?
Mm-hmm.
That's a subject for another day, all this college athletics, but
right.
That's a pretty lame excuse. So then why would you ever do anything about anything? And her excuse was, well, we'll at least stop it in high school. Well, no, you won't. If you weren't willing to take on the big bad NCAA, then
are you talking about like
the transgender thing.
Okay. So she's caved on that.
Oh yeah. And a couple of weeks ago, it became a big fancy story because all sports writers are left wing. I mean, if there's one listening who isn't,
NECN completely. Yeah.
So the big story, and there's Sally Jenkins, whose claim to fame is that Dan Jenkins was her father, is a sports writer for the Washington Post. And she had a big issue, and there was the truth in it that NCAA women's basketball tournament gets the short shrift. All right, fine, But I said, well, this is great, except there won't be any women's sports.
No.
Unless you take on the transgender issue. And it's funny how no single sports writer wants to talk about that. None. There are no mainstream sports writers talking about it.
And it's very unpopular. Even Biden administration is.
It's 1,000% unpopular.
Even Biden is backing away from it. He started out gangbusters. Oh, we're going to integrate the girls' bathroom. Big. This is the great civil rights movement of our time.
And then whoops.
What?
Then whoops.
Yeah, he's backing away. They do have a midterm coming up, and it is unpopular on all sides. There was, I think, now 2 states. I believe Arkansas.
Arkansas is one.
Yeah, that are basically saying no to it. So, she's the fact that she would cave on that does show, as you say, Mike, she's getting attention from the big media. They, and it's very alluring.
Yeah, of course.
She wants to maybe run for president, I guess, or she wants to. It's like they hold out the carrot. I could speak to this. I don't want to go too far into this, but that's, don't talk about this and do talk about that, and we're going to give you a little coverage. You'll get in the Boston Globe as long as you agree with A, B, and C. And then you say, okay, and you kowtow, and you're in the Globe. it's very powerful, and I get it. I mean, it's hard to say no to that. It's and it's hard to mess with Zuckerberg at Facebook too. Look what happens. You have to play ball to these people, but it sounds like she's gone off the reservation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a disappointment to a lot of people
Yeah,
that saw her as the new star, but that's the problem. They get bit by this bug of stardom, and it just
it's a very addictive thing, and I mean I can speak to that. I've talked about that in even
yeah.
in this book. And speaking of which, can you see how they're now pumping up Pence as the next Republican nominee? Forget it. Never. I would vote for Marx before Pence. He is the worst. I mean,
Well, he's a rhino.
it's worse than a rhino. He totally sold out at the time at several moments when he could have made a difference. And I'm particularly talking about
Well, I mean, but you're being kind.
yeah,
He didn't even attempt to make a showing
no,
of the
and
fact that he might consider
doing what he was
objecting.
constitutionally
Yeah.
given the right to do, and using his office as president of the combined.
No, he was a total disappointment, but
Complete hack. And also, I think he might have been undermining Trump. I mean, even early on when Trump first came in, he claimed that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn had lied to him. I don't know about that.
no.
That was like playing ball with conspirators who were trying.
Well, I mean, Trump was surrounded by these guys the whole time. Of course,
Yeah.
the one who was just notoriously awful was Bill Barr.
Oh my God, what a disappointment! What a complete traitor. I mean, he was giving information. Even before he left office, he was like, he blocked the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah.
Now he's apparently he was involved with shafting Matt Gaetz. I don't know the details on that. It's just coming over the wires actually yet this morning. But he says that he's been set up and that what they're claiming happened never happened. I tend to believe him. We'll see. But he said it goes back to Barr and the last months of the Trump administration, where he was framed up by people in.
Well, see,
in the
to be
Department of
honest with
Justice.
you, I've never understood why at the time people thought Barr was so great. Because remember, he was the pro bono defense attorney for the sniper that took out Vicky Weaver. I mean, why even do that?
He was also had some connection to Jeffrey Epstein, but we can get
Yes.
to that. But
Yes.
but the thing is that and he was an establishment lawyer guy. He was brought from the HW administration.
Right.
And I mean I think that he talked a good game. I mean he sounded conservative. You'd hear him speak, and he would go over constitutional questions. He had a certain, he sounded a bit like Robert Bork. I mean, he really seemed to know his way. So I think he fooled a lot of people, including me. And it's just a terrible betrayal, big disappointment.
Well, he wasn't, there was a whole list of them.
I know.
And
I mean, maybe that's the one thing we can fault Trump for, is that he may not have been the best judge of character. He didn't really see the nature of some of these people around him. And I think that, I mean, in a sense, Reagan was much better at that. He knew, and I think Nancy, his wife, knew, and was like,
well, the difference with Reagan was he brought in people he had known from back in California. And in Trump's case, he got recommendations of essentially establishment hacks who had been there for all these years. And somehow he thought he was already making a big stir, then maybe this would smooth it over. But at the end of the day, he should have brought in his own crew.
Yes.
And he never did.
No, that's the one area I think he was a bit weaker than he could have been. And it's just too bad, because he was surrounded by people who were trying to undermine him from all quarters.
I think some of that.
I think there were some good people there too. I'm not saying all. I think Mike Pompeo was good.
Yeah. I think where some of that came from is that his experience was in business, not in politics.
Right.
Generally speaking, if you've worked with people in a business setting, you can, over the years, judge this individual. And it's very unlikely that someone that you've gone up with for the past 10, 20 years is going to suddenly turn around and screw you. But on the other hand, if you're immersed into a given situation where they're basically just changing the quote unquote figurehead, then it's a whole different ballgame. And I don't think he had enough contempt for the establishment, in my judgment.
Well, he didn't really gauge the power of it to the point, and understand. And this surprises me because I thought that he certainly spoke like he did, and I think that he did in the most basic sense. He did understand what he was up against. I mean, I remember that Tom Hartman, very left-wing radio host. I know. Do you know who Tom Hartman is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, real hard left, old left. Strictly marching along. Everything is a conspiracy by the corporate interests. He made a comment that he said that Trump's father had been a secret member of the John Birch Society. Now, the Birch Society did have members who were not wanting to be known publicly. And I think that that's very plausible. And I think it's great. When I heard that, I'm like,
particularly wrong with the John.
Not wrong, but I'm like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Not that I agree with the Birch Society and everything, but the point is they're good patriots and they do know the score in terms of what this sort of deep state's about. That's the one thing they're very good at. So I'm like, great. If Trump's father was part of that, I mean, that tells me that Trump knows the nature of the quote unquote conspiracy.
Well, maybe though he figured that he couldn't come in like a total bull in the china shop. I mean, I absolutely guarantee you that he despised Fauci and Birx. But if you just started kicking ass everywhere, it may not be good optics.
Well, something, I think that Trump was, in a way, the same. You know how, like, I mean, with Reagan, I mean, they try to assassinate him.
Yeah.
Right. They sent out a gunman, and that had a certain moderate. It kind of brought him into the reservation. I think in Trump's case, it was the when he fired Comey, which he was totally able to do.
100% justified.
Then all of a sudden he's got this brown shirt with Mueller, and they're harassing him every day and making his life miserable and sending out. And I think that had the same effect as a gunshot. It was like, now what if I fire this one? I can't fire that one. It kind of was like he was somewhat hamstrung after that because it was, you don't want to trigger another impeachment.
Well, the establishment is so corrupt.
Right.
That's why I'm kind of pessimistic about any meaningful change. I mean, Trump was able to come in and do certain things, but a lot of things he wasn't able to do because this so-called deep state is so entrenched.
That's why we need to have people run for local assessor.
Yeah.
We have to start from the ground up and begin. And even then, I mean, it's going to be very difficult for people not to get corrupted as they get in because
you've got to break the power of these big regulatory agencies.
And I don't know if it can ever be done because the awards the power they control is one that can both award and punish to a degree that you can't even imagine. And it's just a very unusual person that knows how to stand up to that. And it's it's a bit discouraging, but what can we do? We have to shine a light when we can. Anyway, Mike, I got to run. So what's your latest article?
Well, it was on millennial health is the current article before and after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And some survey data that's kind of interesting that was done on now the biggest demographic. I'm no longer the biggest demographic. It's the millennials now.
Right.
So, good for them.
All right. Excellent. No, good way to go. All right. Michael D. Shaw, thanks as always for joining me. We'll keep it up next week. And
always great to deal with the Athens of America.
The shitty of Boston. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Great.
All right. Take care.